Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to be talking about violent extremism in many areas of the world. My guest today is an expert on this topic. Dr. Morten Bøås is a research professor at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. He works on violent conflict, insurgencies, and fragile states in Africa and the Middle East. His latest book is titled Resisting Radicalization, Exploring the Non-Occurrence of Violent Extremism. Dr. Morten Bøås, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate you being with me today. Let's get right into it. What is the thrust of this book? The title says a lot, but what is the main thrust?
The main thrust here is basically that, when after September 9, after the 9/11 attacks on the US, that led quite naturally to a massive focus on the actors behind these attacks, their ideology, their organization, how they managed to do this, and the kind of consequences that it had. But it also led to a this was initiated. Places like Afghanistan, parts of the Middle East, and later other areas that were sort of included, and I would say also introduced into this idea that the Western world, the US and its allies in Europe, but also elsewhere, was involved in a global war on terror. What this made us not see is that even in areas where violent extremist actors are present, most people are not necessarily radicalized. And that is what we wanted to look at in this book. And the book is based on a major grant that we got from the European Union, so-called the Horizon 2020 program, where we looked at this sort of forgotten part of this equation. We looked at this in what we, based on the available literature, identified and defined as enabling environments. That's environments where all these factors that are supposed to be conducive to the emergence and spread of violent extremism, they are present there. But still, if you look at what actually happens there, I mean, yes, you do find violent extremist actors, but you also find a lot of local community resilience. You find a lot of resilience to this, because most people are not necessarily radicalized. And this is what this book tried to explore. What is the foundations of both community but also individual resilience to violent extremism? And I have worked a lot on this issue in various parts of the Sahel, and the Sahel countries like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are now seen as sort of, the new front in the global war of terror. But even here, I mean, most people are not radicalized. I mean, it's only a tiny minority who fall for this, and a number of people show remarkable resilience. And this is what this book is all about.
That's very good. And of course, that was international terrorism, the attack at 9/11. We'll talk about that for another moment or two, and then I want to bring it down to domestic terrorism to see how you're focusing on that. But what were some of the major conclusions that you came to out of the 9/11 attacks? There have been so many theories, so many books written, so many people interviewed, so many thousands of kilometers of videotape and that type of thing. But what were one or two or three of your major conclusions?
And when it comes to the 9/11, I think we can just say that this was in many ways a Black Swan Operation. And in that regard, I mean, it's quite similar to what Hamas was able to do when they attacked from Gaza. It's something that happens because it could happen, but nobody believed that it could happen. This is how this come about. I mean, this was the first. I mean, of course, I mean, I'm not here disregarding at all the casualties and the suffering that is caused the United States of America. That's not what I'm saying, but I mean the level of entrepreneurship and innovation from Al-Qaeda and the terrorists who conducted this attack was very high. They did something that intelligence services at that time had not thought about. And much of the same we can say about the Hamas attack on Israel. I mean, it's happened under the nose and under the eyes of Shin Bet, which is supposed to be one of the best, if not the best, intelligence organization in the world, and they simply didn't see it because they didn't think it was possible that this could happen. So, I mean, when violent extremists are able to do things like this, it is because they do something that is not within the frame of what is considered possible by intelligence apparatuses. So I think that this is the main sort of takeaway when it comes to what actually happened on 9/11. And then, of course, there is, and other people has written a lot about this. I mean, how this was organized, the way that this was done. I mean, the length of planning and implementation and so on and so forth. I mean, obviously, I mean, Al-Qaeda had considerable resources that they put into this, and at that time, I mean, Al-Qaeda had a huge war chest, to put it that way. They had money that they could spend on this because it was an expensive, comprehensive operation.
It certainly was. And the warning signs were there. Our FBI missed them. It was obvious that there were people who were trying to learn how to fly a plane, not to land it or to take off, just to control it and that type of thing. And the agencies didn't communicate with one another. When you're talking about the horrific disaster that happened in Israel with the Hamas attack, the Israelis were warned in advance that this was coming. And like you said, they did not want to believe it. And they said it's impossible. And of course, Hamas had been planning this for years. And it was a low tech, but really sophisticated operation, and that they were able to pull it off, as I see it, as someone from the outside. But let's talk for a moment about that was international terrorism. The biggest terrorist attack we've had outside of 9/11 in the United States, as viewed by a large number of people, legal people and what have you, was the January 6th, 2021 insurrection. Some call it treason, insurrection of Trump supporters who attacked the U.S. Capitol. How would you classify that as domestic terrorism? And of course, it was certainly violent. I would say you couldn't get more violent, but you could, and it was certainly a very, very violent incident. How would you classify that?
Bill, that's a very good question, because here I think there is a debate around this. And I think that we sort of have a jury here. I mean, there are different ways of seeing this. I mean, one could classify this as an act of terrorism. Others would not do so, and I tend to agree with those who do not necessarily want to classify this as terrorism. And the reason for this is that was not indiscriminate. It was targeting not a restaurant or a shopping mall or anything like this. It targeted the very center of political authority in the United States. And while I, of course, feel for those that suffered for this, including, brave police officers who tried to protect democracy, basically. The violence was targeting state officials. So I would, as much as I obviously don't support what was happening, but I see it more as a violent riot based on extremist ideology than I would classify this, what happened on the 6th of January, as an act of terrorism in itself. And that's also because, contrary to some of my colleagues, I prefer to have a very, I think we are best served with quite a narrow definition of what constitutes an act of terrorism. I'm a little worried that at times we are creating such a big bag that almost everything that we, for various reasons, dislike is put into that bag. And then the labeling of what is terrorism and what is not terrorism also becomes a political act.
I see. It was a
so
very
that would be my take on it, that this, what happened on the 6th of January it's a riot with political motivation based on people being inspired by a violent extremist ideology.
I see. Also based on a series of lies about the election that was held. So yeah, I see.
I see that as part of that violent extremist ideology.
Right. That
makes it possible to create these kind of lies about an election being stolen and make certain people believe that because they have bought into this ideology.
Exactly. I see. So it was a very violent act, but it wouldn't be classified, as you see it, as domestic terrorism. So, okay. Now
I would not, but some of my colleagues do classify it for it, and we just have a different approach to where we put the boundaries for what we define as an act of terrorism.
I see. Okay. Well, we're going to take a very short break and come back and talk about the Sahel and other areas of the world that are perhaps violent or hopefully will never become violent. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with the PBS or community access television station, or you're involved with an intra-campus television hookup, or you have a podcast, or you just have a computer and you like our shows, you would like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're taking a look at violence and what are some of the causes of violence? Where are some of the most violent areas of the world? My guest today is an expert on this topic. Dr. Morten Bøås is a research professor at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. His most recent book is titled he's done a variety of work in this area, but his latest book is Resisting Radicalization, Exploring the Non-Occurrence of Violent Extremism. Dr. Bøås, we're going to talk about Sahel in a minute, but what are there certain, I know you've mentioned some of the characteristics, I guess I would say, or some of the causes that would lend themselves to maybe promoting violence. Are there certain things that do lend themselves more so to violence, maybe the climate crisis, unemployment, lack of education, issues like that? Are those some of the characteristics that, and it wouldn't apply in every incident, but perhaps could make people become more violent?
What we clearly see is that underneath people's turn to violence underneath people's turn to violent extremist ideas and ideologies, usually we find considerable social discontent. Discontent born out of, for some, it's out of this perception they may have, which may be real, it may not be real, of alienation and marginalization. Whereas for others, and particularly when we look at this in very poor countries like in the Sahel or parts of the Middle East, issues concerning unemployment, lack of life prospects. I mean, we have to sort of take into consideration that in some of these countries now where this either has been rampant, like in Iraq and Syria, or today in countries in the Sahel like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, we are dealing with extremely youthful populations. These are some of the youngest populations we have seen since we basically started counting and doing demographics. I mean, in Mali, it could very well be that over 50% of the population is below the age of 15. So enormously large young populations. They are in fact better educated than previous generations. And they have something, almost all of them, in the palm of their hand, and that's the cell phone. It's not necessarily the newest cell phone, but they do have a cell phone. And that cell phone makes it possible for them to understand that other people are living much better lives than they are doing. And I think one can only imagine how it is. Let's say that you are 17, 18 years old and you live in some forlorn village somewhere. You are not necessarily starving, but you're not well fed either. And every time when the so-called hungry season comes, that's the season before harvesting, you really need to tighten your belt. And life is hard, dusty, dirty, you work. And then you realize at the age of 18 that today is the rest of my life. This is how it's going to look like until I die. It's not a very nice thought. And some of these people, not that many, but some of them, decides that they need to do something. And if they really want to try to change their lives, I mean, they can find something else there. Most, they don't find something else, they just exchange one kind of poverty with another kind of poverty. Some try migration, or they just have to return home and give up of Europe, of relocating to a better world, or join either criminal groups, or they decide that their anger and dissatisfaction and discontent can be unleashed and find a pathway through some group that is inspired by violent extremist ideas. So, yes, I mean, this kind of social discontent born by unemployment, lack of education, lack of life prospects, also say, and that this is important because all of these countries that you know are talking about, these states, I mean, they have so-called counter-insurgency, counter-terrorism strategies. With many of these strategies is that, and the way they are applied, is that they lead to the opposite. Stereotyping of certain groups, mistreatment of young people based on the suspicion that they should have anything to do with violent extremist groups, have pushed considerable number of people into that pathway, a pathway that they otherwise probably not would have taken if it hadn't been for this kind of extremely heavy-handed tactics by state security forces. So that is in fact also a very important push factor. Because I mean, if you are kicked around, beaten by state security forces, accused of being a terrorist without actually ever having been one, that may very well make you think that I want to get back at these guys. And how can I get back at them? Well, it's by joining that group. So yes, there is a multitude of very genuine grievances that drives a lot of people into this, and particularly for the rank and file in these organizations. They seem to be more motivated by very genuine grievances than ideological conviction or religious beliefs, in my point of view.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. And you made a tremendous argument for programs that the United Nations is operating, like food programs, training programs, health programs, what the U.S. was doing with the AID program to help people in other parts of the world to remove some of those reasons, or to hopefully to, I'm not going to say placate them, but to reduce the opportunities of people becoming so disgruntled, so unhappy, so disenchanted that they want to join criminal groups or they want to conduct violent activities. But you've made just a tremendous argument for these programs. This is why we need more of them, especially when you have these youths that are, as you said, 15, 16, 17, who are unemployed, poorly educated perhaps, don't have much of a future, are stuck in a little rural village, which if they actually had a job and a business, they might actually enjoy being in that village, but that's another issue. But no, this is extremely, extremely important. And that's why we really need to support these programs and to encourage the United Nations and other aid groups too. They're doing, it's not just the United States. There are hundreds of aid groups around the world, and the Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, and those countries are really taking the lead in this area, and they're to be congratulated for doing it. And we applaud what you are doing. Well, we're running short on time, but let me ask you, in the last minute or 2 minutes we have, what would be your recommendations to our viewers around the world who are listening to your wise words, and to help them better understand violence and maybe what they can do to help their country or their village avoid it?
I think the best thing we can do is to work to remove these underlying causes. I mean, it's very hard to battle ideologies and ideas, but we can remove many of these grievances that makes people join these movements. And if there is one thing we can do a lot better is to become, and this goes for all agencies and everybody who works on this, myself included, is that we need to become better at understanding the foundations for local community resilience. And we need to become better at assisting local communities to remain resilient. And that means that we need to work hard, but with a very light footprint, to support these people that we know are out there. I mean, in our research, we have generically identified them. We call them local agents of resilience. But we must allow them to continue to be their own local agent of resilience, because the moment they become our agents of resilience, then it doesn't work anymore. And if you allow me, Bill, just 30 seconds on,
sure, please,
on what you just mentioned, is about agencies and also about US agencies, because I was very recently, just 1.5 weeks ago, I was in Nigeria presenting a report based on fieldwork we did with a Nigerian partner last year in Borno State, northeast Nigeria. This is where the Boko Haram movement was born. Things are better there now, but if this freeze on US aid continue, I am extremely worried about what will happen here, because the freeze that the Trump administration has placed on US aid leaves an open hole that even if there are other governments, like you mentioned, my own government, Scandinavian governments, who are really working hard on some of these issues, at least in the short to medium term horizon, maybe even in a longer term horizon, it's extremely difficult for any actor or any group of actors to fill that hole that now has been opened. And if the US government continues to be concerned about global terrorism, well, freezing US aid is basically like shooting yourself in the foot and leaving the door open for precisely for these kind of actors, for the agents of violent extremism. Because the best antidote to violent extremism is not hardcore coin weapons, this kill the terrorist kind of thing. It's removing the social landscape that makes these ideas thrive in the first place. This is what we need to work on. And here I think we all can do more, but we need to also always do this together with local partners and be context and conflict sensitive when we approach these issues, because after all, we should always approach this under the maxim of do no harm. Thank you.
Exactly. And the USAID program is covered by so many economists and accountants have said this is one of the best run programs in the world. It's one of the most efficient, one of the most effective. There's less waste, fraud, and abuse in that program than certainly in the Defense Department. I think there's no argument about that in the U.S. Defense Department. But this is one of the best means we have, along with other soft power like the United States Peace Corps operations in 70-some countries around the world, to garner friends for the United States and to reduce these problematic situations that will turn people possibly to violence against the United States. And not to mention these aid programs, while making friends, also open doors for American businesses, Norwegian businesses. It's really a win-win situation. And this is something that we really need to work on. But Dr. Morten Bøås, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you so much for having me, Bill. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you, sir. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.